There are certain things in this world that are not for sale, not for negotiation. They are anchors, points of stillness in a spinning world. For me, that anchor was a cabin. 90 years of logs, settled deep into a mountain that had long forgotten the bite of the axe that felled them. My grandfather built it, my father repaired it, and I, Arthur Vance, have fled to it. I came here seeking refuge from a different kind of jungle, one made of glass and steel, where predators wore tailored suits. I'd spent 15 years in private equity, a world of hostile takeovers and leverage buyouts, and I'd been good at it. Too good. It had hollowed me out, so I cashed out and retreated to the one place where value wasn't measured in quarterly earnings. My line was drawn at the tree line, a sacred border between my peace and the world's noise. Then, a man named Bartholomew Sterling arrived with a map and a condescending smirk, planning to bulldoze that line and pave straight through my soul. He was the president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, a man whose ambition to turn our quiet mountain community into a gaudy, suburban parody of luxury knew no bounds. The letter that came was formal, cold, and absolute. My property was being acquired via a dubious clause in the original land deeds to make way for the Pine Ridge Scenic Connector, a new road straight to a planned expansion of the golf course. My cabin, my anchor, was designated for demolition. What Sterling and his board of sycophants didn't know, however, was that my years in the city weren't spent learning how to bend. They were spent learning how to break things, companies, contracts, and arrogant men who believe themselves invincible. They thought they were fighting a reclusive hermit. They were about to find out they had picked a fight with a shark they'd mistaken for a goldfish. Have you ever been pushed by someone who believes their title makes him a king and you a peasant? This is the story of how I didn't just push back. I bought the kingdom, dismantled the throne, and used the rubble to pave a better road. My first and only attempt at a peaceful resolution was a humiliating exercise in futility. I attended the next HOA board meeting, held in a sterile community clubhouse that smelled of pine-scented cleaner and quiet desperation. I stood before Bartholomew Sterling and his four-person board, a man in a worn flannel shirt facing a tribunal of pressed golf polos. Sterling, a man whose silver hair seemed shellacked into a permanent state of disapproval, listened with theatrical patience as I made my case. I spoke of the cabin's history, of its hand-hewn timbers. I presented 3 alternate routes for their precious road, each one less destructive, more logical, and cheaper, backed by topographical maps I printed out. I even appealed to their sense of fiscal responsibility. Sterling let the silence hang in the air for a moment after I finished, a little smirk playing on his lips. "Mr. Vance," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "we appreciate your sentimental attachment to your structure." He made the word sound like Shaq. However, the board's decision is final. Progress cannot be held hostage by one man's nostalgia. Your cabin is, frankly, an eyesore, and its removal is a necessary step in the beautification and modernization of Pine Ridge. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand, and the board members nodded in unison like bobbleheads on a dashboard. I walked out of that clubhouse, not just defeated, but with a cold fire kindling in my gut. Sterling had made it clear this wasn't about a road. It was about power, and he had just made a grave miscalculation. He had made it personal. The very next week, the escalation began. Bright orange stakes appeared on my land, a dotted line of fluorescent insults marching right past my grandfather's stone fire pit and stopping 10 feet from my front door. Then came the certified letter, a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation, citing non-existent geological instability issues with my land that necessitated the chosen route. It was all lies, of course, designed to create a paper trail of justification. That was the moment the hermit died and the analyst returned. I dusted off my old secure laptop, the one I'd used to dissect corporate behemoths, and I poured a cup of black coffee. The frustration that had been a hot, messy emotion began to cool and harden into something far more dangerous, a strategy. My first search wasn't for lawyers or protest groups. It was for a company name I'd overheard at the meeting, Apex Mountain Movers, They were the contracted muscle for Sterling's grand vision. I thought, you want to use a tool to destroy my home? Fine, I'll just have to own the tool. The hunt began. From the solitude of my cabin, surrounded by the quiet hum of the forest, I plunged back into the digital cacophony of the financial world. Apex Mountain Movers was a privately held, mid-sized construction firm, which meant its dirty laundry wasn't hanging out on a public stock exchange. But no company is an island. They leave footprints, loan documents, UCC filings, county permits, property records, and the digital breadcrumbs of their online presence. For 2 days, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of cold fury, I did what I do best. I built a profile. I constructed a complete financial and operational model of a company I had never set foot in. I found their primary lender, a regional bank whose quarterly reports hinted at a tightening of their commercial lending standards. I found records of their equipment financing, a fleet of bulldozers, excavators, and graders, all heavily leveraged. Then, through a discreet inquiry with an old contact in the commercial credit rating business, I found the jackpot. George Croft, the founder and majority owner of Apex, was in trouble. He was 62, his health was beginning to fail, and he was personally guaranteeing a massive balloon payment on his equipment loan, due in less than 6 months. The HOA contract was a lifeline for him, a last big score to get the bank off his back and maybe have enough left over to retire to Florida. His 2 minority partners were getting nervous, pressuring him to sell his shares and de-risk the company before the loan came due and wiped them all out. George was proud, stubborn, and trapped. He was staring down the barrel of a financial gun, and Bartholomew Sterling was offering him a way out that just so happened to run straight through my living room. That was my aha moment. It wasn't a flicker of insight. It was a blinding flash of absolute clarity. Fighting Sterling was like wrestling a pig. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. He would use HOA funds to bury me in legal fees. Protesting was a waste of breath. The true point of leverage wasn't Sterling's ego. It was George Croft's desperation. Sterling didn't wield the power here. He had simply rented it. The real power lay with the man who owned the bulldozers. And I realized, with a grim and certain satisfaction, that that man was about to be me. The plan formed not as a question, but as a certainty. I wasn't going to file an injunction. I wasn't going to plead with a judge. I was going to perform a surgical, hostile takeover. This wasn't a battle to be fought in a courtroom. It was a transaction to be executed in a boardroom. I spent an afternoon on the phone with Marcus Thorne, my old mentor from the private equity world. Marcus is a magnificent old bastard, a man with the morals of a pirate and the mind of a chess grandmaster. When I first told him my plan, he laughed for a solid minute. "Arthur," he cackled, "you magnificent sociopath. I thought you went to the mountains to find your soul, not to plot corporate raids on lumberjacks, but as I laid out the financials on Apex, the leverage point with the owner, and the sheer, elegant brutality of the strategy, his laughter subsided, replaced by a tone of professional admiration. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It's a work of art. They'll never see it coming." He agreed to consult, providing the buffer and the strategic oversight I would need. The first step was to create a ghost. I wired a significant chunk of my retirement portfolio, a sum that made my stomach clench, but my resolve hardened, to a holding account. Then, through a law firm Marcus recommended in another state, I formed a Delaware LLC. We gave it the most boring, forgettable name we could think of, Mountain View Holdings, LLC. I was now invisible, a beneficial owner hidden behind layers of corporate law. Next, Marcus and the lawyers drafted the offer. It had to be irresistible, an all-cash deal, a premium over the company's strained book value. We would assume their manageable debts, but, crucially, our offer included the immediate, full repayment of George Croft's personally guaranteed equipment loan. It wasn't just an offer to buy his company. It was an offer to buy his freedom, to lift the millstone from his neck in one clean motion. We also structured generous retention bonuses for his key crew chiefs and operators. I didn't want the company's talent walking out the door. I needed the machine to be fully operational when I took the wheel. The letter of intent was drafted, the non-disclosure agreements were prepared, and the wire instructions were ready. The trap was meticulously constructed, baited with the one thing a desperate man can't refuse: a clean slate. While I was orchestrating a corporate decapitation from my cabin, Bartholomew Sterling was basking in the glow of his own perceived brilliance. He was a man intoxicated by the fumes of his petty authority. He held a community progress celebration at the clubhouse, a catered affair with cheap champagne and a 5-foot-long banner showing an artist's rendering of his road. It was named, of course, the Sterling Scenic Drive. From my porch, through a pair of high-power binoculars, I watched him glad-handing residents, his arm draped over the shoulders of his board members, pointing towards my mountain as if he were a Roman emperor indicating where a new aqueduct should go. He was selling them a fantasy, a future of rising property values and exclusive access, all built on the foundation of my home's destruction. His arrogance was my greatest asset. He saw me as a speed bump, a minor inconvenience already smoothed over. He couldn't conceive of a world where the hermit he dismissed had the capacity or the will to fight back on a battlefield he didn't even know existed. His overconfidence made him blind, and it allowed me to move through the shadows completely undetected. With the final details locked in with Marcus, the plan shifted from theoretical to operational. The offer was finalized at a number that was just high enough to be a shocking relief to George Croft, but still a strategic bargain for me. It was the perfect predator's price, enough to guarantee a kill without wasting energy. We structured the approach to be professionally aggressive. My lawyer, a quiet, ruthless woman named Evelyn Reed, would make the initial contact. She would represent Mountain View Holdings. My name would never be mentioned. The offer would be presented as a simple, strategic acquisition by an investment group looking to expand its portfolio in the region. The narrative had to be plausible, boring, and utterly disconnected from the Pine Ridge HOA and its petty squabbles. The final pieces were in place. The legal documents were a loaded weapon. The money was the ammunition. And Sterling, laughing and sipping champagne less than a mile away, was the oblivious target, celebrating a victory that had already been stolen from him. The fuse was lit. The first move was made not with a bang, but with a quiet, courteous phone call. Evelyn Reed, my legal proxy, dialed the main office line for Apex Mountain Movers and asked for George Croft. Her tone was disarmingly placid, the voice of a professional who deals in 9-figure transactions as casually as ordering a coffee. She introduced herself as counsel for Mountain View Holdings and stated her purpose. Her client was prepared to make a substantial, all-cash offer to acquire his company. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Croft was, as we predicted, deeply suspicious. He likely got calls from business brokers and bottom feeders all the time. He started to give her a polite brush-off, but Evelyn cut through his defense with a single, surgical sentence. She named the exact, to the dollar figure of his outstanding equipment loan. "My client," she said calmly, "is aware of your upcoming obligations to North Star Regional Bank and is prepared to make that particular problem disappear within 72 hours. The silence that followed was different. It was the sound of a man's entire world shifting on its axis. A meeting was scheduled for the following day at a neutral law office in the city. I remained in my cabin, a general directing a battle from a remote command post. Evelyn and one of Marcus's junior associates, a sharp young man who looked the part of a hungry investment analyst, attended the meeting. They presented the formal offer. I received a text from the associate halfway through. He's pale. Partners are practically vibrating. He's trying to act tough, but he's cornered. As we anticipated, Croft's pride flared up. He postured, claiming the company was worth more, that he had other interested parties. It was a weak bluff, and Evelyn called it without flinching. "Mr. Croft," she stated, "this is not a negotiation. This is an offer. It is final, and it expires in 48 hours. You can spend the next 6 months being bled dry by the bank, or you could be on a beach in Florida next week with 8 figures in your account. The choice is yours." It was a calculated risk, a dose of high-pressure tactics that could have backfired. But we knew our man. We weren't just buying his assets. We were buying him out of a nightmare. The clock began to tick. The 48 hours were the longest of my life. I paced the floor of my cabin, the old wood groaning under my feet. Every creak of the house, Every rustle of leaves outside sounded like a ringing phone. I was completely cut off from the process, trusting the team I had put in place. It was an exercise in ceding control to maintain it, a paradox I knew well from my old life. Sterling, meanwhile, was making noise of his own. An official start date for the demolition was posted on the community message board, 10 days away. A large Apex Mountain Movers sign was hammered into the ground at the entrance to the proposed road, a garish orange and black tombstone for my home. He was a man in a hurry, eager to see the dirt fly. On the morning of the second day, with just hours left on our deadline, the call came. It was Evelyn. "He's in," she said, her voice flat, professional. "He signed. The wire transfers are initiated. Congratulations, Mr. Vance. You own a construction company." A wave of relief so profound washed over me that I had to sit down. The weight of the impending demolition, a dread that had been sitting on my chest for weeks, simply vanished. The transaction closed with silent, digital speed. By noon, Mountain View Holdings, LLC, and by extension me, was the sole owner of Apex Mountain Movers. My first act as owner was an email sent from a newly created anonymous address for the holding company to the acting manager at Apex. The subject line was operational stand-down. The email was brief, effective immediately. All project initiations and non-essential fieldwork are to be paused pending a full strategic review by the new ownership. Acknowledge receipt. Within minutes, a reply came back. Acknowledge the behemoth was mine. And it was asleep. The first tremor of this action reached Bartholomew Sterling by late afternoon. He must have called the site foreman, wondering why the preliminary clearing hadn't started. The foreman would have told him about the company-wide stand-down. Sterling, I can only imagine, went ballistic. He called Apex's main office, demanding to speak to George Croft. The receptionist, following a script I had provided, politely informed him that Mr. Croft was no longer with the company. When he demanded to speak to the new owner, she replied with a line designed to drive a man like him insane. "The new ownership group will be in touch with all clients in due course." The suspense was no longer mine to bear. I had taken my own anxiety and transferred it, with interest, directly to my tormentor. The emergency HOA meeting was Bartholomew Sterling's idea, his final, fatal misstep. For a week, he had been stonewalled. His calls went unreturned. His threatening emails about breach of contract were met with placid, legally impeccable replies from Evelyn Reed's firm, stating that the new owners of Apex Mountain Movers were diligently reviewing their contractual obligations. He was a man who thrived on control, and for the first time, he had none. The mysterious Mountain View Holdings was an impenetrable fortress. So, he did what bullies do when they feel their power slipping. He tried to reassert it through public spectacle. He called a mandatory meeting for all Pine Ridge residents. The agenda, posted in bold letters on the clubhouse door, was legal action against Apex Mountain Movers and the abandonment of the Scenic Connector project. He intended to rally the community to get their approval to launch a massive lawsuit, to paint himself as the victim of a shady, faceless corporation. He was staging his own passion play, and he had cast himself as the martyr. I let him. I arrived a few minutes late, slipping into the back of the crowded room. Sterling was already in full flight, his face flushed with righteous indignation. He stood at a lectern, pounding his fist for emphasis. "This faceless, cowardly holding company," he thundered. "They hide behind lawyers and refuse to even speak to us. They have breached their contract. They have betrayed the trust of this community. And I am here tonight to ask for your support as we sue them for every penny they are worth." He paused for applause, which was scattered and uncertain. The residents were more confused than angry. I began to walk forward. I moved slowly, deliberately, down the central aisle. Heads turned. People shuffled out of my way. Sterling stopped mid-rant, his eyes narrowing as he saw me approach. "Mr. Vance," he sneered, "this is a private meeting for residents in good standing. You are hardly that. Please return to your seat." I didn't stop until I reached the lectern. I looked at him, then at the silent, watching crowd. "Bartholomew," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily in the tense silence. You said you wanted to speak with the owner of Apex Mountain Movers. I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Well, here I am. The silence in the room was absolute, a perfect vacuum of sound. Every eye was on me, but my focus was entirely on Bartholomew Sterling. His face went through a rapid, fascinating series of transformations. First, utter confusion, as if I'd started speaking in a foreign language. Then, a flicker of dawning comprehension, immediately followed by indignant disbelief. Finally, as the terrifying implications of my statement settled in his mind, his face sagged into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. It was the look of a king who has just been checkmated by a pawn. That's absurd, he sputtered, his voice a pathetic squeak. You're lying. This is some kind of trick. I didn't respond to his accusation. Instead, I placed a thin file folder on the lectern. I slid out a single document and pushed it toward him. This, I said to the audience, my voice steady and clear, is the contract between the Pine Ridge HOA and Apex Mountain Movers. The contract Mr. Sterling signed, obligating Apex to build his road. Then I slid a much thicker document out from the folder and placed it on top of the first. And these, I continued, are the executed acquisition documents, legally transferring 100% of the ownership of Apex Mountain Movers to Mountain View Holdings, LLC. I tapped a final signature page, one bearing my own name as the sole director of the LLC. Which is me. I am your contractor. A collective gasp went through the room. Sterling stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and panic. The man who had wielded bureaucracy as a weapon was now being bludgeoned by it. He was a creature of paper and power, and I had just bought all the paper. He tried to speak, but only a choked gurgle came out. The foundation of his world had just turned to dust beneath his feet. He had nowhere to run, no one to blame, and no power to wield. He was just a man in a golf shirt, standing in a room full of people who were beginning to realize he had been completely and utterly outplayed. With Sterling rendered speechless, I turned my full attention to the residents of Pine Ridge. As the new owner of Apex Mountain Movers, I announced, my voice resonating with an authority Sterling could now only dream of. I have conducted a thorough and comprehensive review of the Cena Connector project. My conclusion is simple. The project is logistically reckless, environmentally catastrophic, and fiscally insane. I let that sink in. Therefore, effective immediately, Apex Mountain Movers is formally withdrawing its bid and terminating any and all work related to this project. Sterling finally found his voice. You can't do that. Breach of contract. We'll destroy you. I held up a hand to silence him. Actually, Bartholomew, I can. Your own contract contains a standard feasibility clause allowing the contractor to withdraw if the project is deemed non-viable at their discretion. It's on page 12. You should read your contracts more carefully, the crowd murmured. They saw a bully being dismantled with his own tools. But I wasn't finished. I was not there just to save my cabin. I was there to salt the earth of his entire empire. However, I continued, my company is not abandoning this community. On the contrary, we are prepared to begin work immediately on a series of projects that are actually needed. I gestured to an easel I had an associate place near the stage earlier. I flipped the cover sheet, revealing a detailed map of the entire community, marked up not with a new road, but with dozens of red circles. For the last week, my engineers have surveyed every road, drainage culvert, and common area in Pine Ridge. And what we found was a disgrace. Potholes that could swallow a small car. Drainage systems so clogged that your lower meadow floods every spring. A clubhouse roof that, according to our thermal scans, is leaking heat and energy like a sieve. I then revealed my final piece of evidence. A simplified summary of the HOA's budget for the last 5 years, which I'd obtained from a disgruntled former treasurer. This shows that Mr. Sterling has systematically deferred over $200,000 in essential maintenance, cutting your real services to the bone. Also, he could build a personal legacy project to a golf course few of you can afford to play. He wasn't improving the community. He was starving it to feed his ego. The mood in the room shifted from confusion to cold, hard anger. It was no longer about my cabin. It was about their money, their safety, their community. The glares that had been directed at me were now aimed squarely at the man on the stage, who seemed to be shrinking inside his polo shirt. A woman in the front row stood up. "Is that true, Bart? Is that why you told us we didn't have the money to fix the playground?" Before he could answer, another man shouted, "My basement flooded twice last year. You said it was an act of God." The dam of Sterling's authority broke, and a flood of angry questions and accusations washed over him. He was no longer a president. He was a defendant. The board members behind him began inching away, creating physical distance from his toxicity. His reign was over. He had been publicly, surgically, and irrevocably ruined. The resolution was swift and decisive. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath of my revelations, one of the board members, a woman who clearly saw which way the wind was now blowing, called for a spontaneous vote of no confidence in Bartholomew Sterling. The vote was nearly unanimous. He was stripped of his presidency on the spot, a public dethroning under the fluorescent lights of the clubhouse he had neglected. He didn't say another word, just stumbled down from the lectern and pushed his way through the angry crowd, a man escaping the ruins of his own making. In the weeks that followed, I made good on every single promise. Apex Mountain Movers, my company, became a fixture in Pine Ridge. But instead of tearing down trees, its bulldozers and graders were repaving the crumbling roads. Its crews were clearing the neglected drainage systems. A roofing team was dispatched to repair the clubhouse. I did it all at cost, using the funds from Sterling's vanity project budget to give the residents the services they had been paying for all along. My cabin remained untouched, a quiet monument to the victory. It stood nestled in its trees, the orange survey stakes long since removed, looking exactly as it had for 90 years. I had, ironically, become one of the most active and respected members of the community I had tried so hard to hide from. To protect my solitude, I'd had to engage with the world in a way I never intended. The HOA was completely reformed. A new, practical-minded board was elected, and the beautification committee was permanently disbanded in favor of an infrastructure committee. The entire culture of the place shifted from aspirational luxury to functional community. I had inadvertently become a reformer. Reflecting on it from my porch, I realized the profound irony of it all. I had used the ruthless tools of the corporate world, leveraged acquisitions, strategic analysis, hostile takeovers, to protect something gentle and invaluable. I learned that true strength isn't always about building walls to keep the world out. Sometimes it's about having the courage and the capability to march out into that world, seize the levers of power, and redirect them toward a better purpose. The moral of this story is a simple one, I think. Never underestimate the quiet man. Never assume that because someone seeks peace, they are incapable of waging war. Arrogance is the most potent poison a person can drink because it convinces them they are invulnerable right before they are shattered. The world is full of people like Bartholomew Sterling, who believe their titles and their bluster give them the right to run over others. But it's also full of sleeping giants, ordinary people with extraordinary hidden skills waiting for the right or the wrong person to awaken them. So let me ask you, what sleeping giant lies within you?